If you don't live under a rock, you probably saw many beautiful AI-generated pictures like this or like this. Projects like Dolly and Stable Diffusion have been blowing our minds with these beautiful AI-generated images. Some projects like Lenza were created by providing a specific use case from these AI-generated images, making the creators really rich. Today you will learn how to create a REST API made using NestJS that can communicate with Stable Diffusion model, and maybe you can come up with the next billion-dollar AI startup. But before we proceed, if you like this kind of content, just give me a thumbs up, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so we can learn more about NestJS and these AI integrations. And don't forget about it, the more we learn, the better we become and more value we can provide. So let's do this. Okay, great. So the first thing that we need to do is go into this website, Stability.AI. This is the company behind Stable Diffusion. And then we're going to create an account here for communicating with your models. So you go to this website and then you go to this API section. Then you go to the authentication on the left side. Then you go to this website, beta.dreamstudio.ai. You have to create an account here. I already have an account. If you don't have an account, just follow the steps to create an account, or connect to your Google account if you have one, or the Discord account. After doing this, you will see a page like this, and then on the right side, go to the top right icon, then go to my account, then go to the API key section, and then click to create an API key if you don't have one. Otherwise, just click to copy, and then the API will be copied to your clipboard section. And that's it. Now let's go to the code side. Okay, perfect. Here on terminal, I'm gonna start a new NestJS project using NestJS CLI. For keep going, you must check if you have Nest CLI installed on your machine. In my case, I have this version installed, so I can keep going. So I'm gonna do nest new. I'm gonna call this Stable Diffusion integration. You can call it whatever you want. I'm gonna use Yarn for package management. Okay, great. Now that the initial setup for NestJS project is complete, let's go into the project. So I'm gonna enter into the folder for the project created by NestJS, and then here I'm gonna open up the project using VS Code. Perfect. Yes, I trust the authors. And here we have a basic project created by NestJS. This is the entry point, the bootstrap file. This is the basic controller, the basic module, and the basic service created by NestJS. I'm gonna create a new module here using the Nest CLI. I'm gonna say this is the NestG. I'm gonna create a module first. I'm gonna call it Stable Diffusion Integration. Perfect. Now that we have the module, let's create the service layer and the controller layer. Service and controller. Perfect. Now we have a basic project for doing what we need. So what we have here, we created a basic module with NestJS. This is the module layer that connects with the base module, the initial module, this one. This is the controller layer responsible to intercept the REST API calls. And this is the service layer responsible to hold our code to communicate with Stable Diffusion models. Perfect. The next thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to create a .env file for holding the API key that we just created in the Stability API website. So I'm going to create a .env file. And here we're gonna paste our API key. Perfect. Now I'm gonna install the package from NestJS to read .env files. For doing this, let's go back to the browser, NestJS, read .env. Great. Let's install this package, NestJS config. I'm gonna do yarn add, and then this. And then let's copy this code for using it into the base module. Let's go to the base module, import the module, the configuration module responsible to read the .env file and inject the variables into our project. I'm gonna pass this here. Great. Now our code is reading the API key from the .env file. Let's keep going. Into the service layer, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a function responsible to communicate with the API that we just created the API key for. I'm gonna create a function called generateImage, and this generateImage is going to receive an object, and this object will come from the controller layer. Here, I'm going to define a post method. This is the method that we're going to call from the HTTP routes. I'm gonna call this async generateImage. Perfect. Let me port the module here as well, the service layer. So we're going to port here the Stable Diffusion service layer. This code here, which will be responsible to communicate with the Stable Diffusion model and generate the image. Perfect. This is going to be a post method. I'm going to use the default path provided by this controller. And since we're using a post method, I'm gonna pass the informations like the prompt text using the body. So for doing this, I'm also going to create a model layer for doing this. So let's create the class. So this is going to be the generateImage.dto.ts. DTO stands for data transfer object. So this is going to be the object that we're going to parse from the body request, which we're going to send to the service layer. generateImage.dto. Perfect. And for now, we're just going to pass the prompt, which is the string that we're going to read from the body. Let me fix here, this. Perfect. And as the body, I'm going to read an object from that type, from the generateImage.dto type. Perfect. Now what we're going to do, we're basically going to return that this.service.generateImage, and then we're gonna pass this data object to the next layer. So I'm gonna copy this definition, and then I'm gonna paste it here and fix the port. Perfect. Let's keep going. So for a simple test, what I'm going to do, I'm basically going to return the result here as a simple text to show that our integration is working. Simple string from service layer. This is going to be a simple integration to demonstrate that the integration between the controller layer and the service layer is working. Perfect. Let's start our application. Perfect. So the project is running. Let's test our NestJS service in Postman. Okay, here on Postman, I'm going to create a basic call to communicate with our model, http://localhost on port 3000, and the path for it is this, Stable Diffusion integration. I'm gonna paste this here, remove the quotation marks, and then let's call the post method. Okay, perfect. Now our basic integration is working. Now let's customize the code to communicate with Stable Diffusion. I'm gonna go here, and then we need to define the object. So Stability.AI, they provide a TypeScript client and a Python client. But for the TypeScript client, it's more suited for web JavaScript, and they also require using RPC and gRPC. But they also created recently a REST API that we can access by doing this. So instead of using gRPC, we're going to use the REST API that they provide. So which is api.stability.ai. So this is the REST API that they provided, and this is the one that we're going to use into our application. So here on the left side, we go to the V1 beta, and then we go to the generation. And these are the services that they provide. In our case, we're going to use the text to image service. So you can read the description here. I'm going to attach this link and other important links to you into the video description so you can read more and make your own experiments. Perfect. Let's keep going. In our code, what we're going to do, we're basically going to send a message to this API, and the API will send a binary data to us, and then we're going to decode this binary data, and then we're going to send back into the REST API that we're going to create. So in my case, I'm going to use the HTTP module provided by NestJS, which is this one, NestJS HTTP call. So I need to install this library provided by NestJS for making API calls, which is basically a wrapper for Axios. Yarn add and this library. Perfect. So I'm gonna define some variables here that we're going to use. The first one is the engine ID. So we're going to use this version of Stable Diffusion for our model. And this is going to be the API call. So, yeah, first of all, I need to import the HTTP module. HTTP module provided by NestJS and the module that we just installed. On the service layer, I'm going to inject the HTTP service into this service, into the Stable Diffusion integration service. Perfect. Oh yeah, sorry. I need to do this. Private, read only. Perfect. Now we can access this service here into the other functions. I'm going to rename this data to generate image. And for now, we're gonna pass this static value is going to be 512, 512. The steps I'm gonna define 50, and the text prompts is going to be this object. Basically, what we need to pass a text, which comes from the generate image dot prompt, and a weight for this text. Later on, we're going to define a negative prompt as well. For now, we're just going to pass 1 for making it more simple, and the weight is going to be 1. Perfect. So this is the basic integration with the Stability.AI service. Here we are passing the engine ID, and here we are reading the API key that we take from the API from the website that we had to create an account, which is this one. And here on my account, API key. So this is the API key that we're going to pass here for using the model. For now, I'm passing all these attributes statically, but later on, we're going to update this object to pass these attributes dynamically. Perfect. So this is the HTTP service object that we're going to make for communicating with the API, and this is the object that we're going to get as an answer. But for NestJS, for getting the actual object provided by Axios, I need to also pass this. Use this last value from RxJS. So this is the actual Axios response. But there's a thing. The response type, we need to change this to be a array buffer for reading the object, and then we also need to save this array buffer locally as an image into the local machine. And then we're going to use the NestJS libraries to read the local object that we're going to create and send it back to the API. So this might sound a bit confusing. Let's do it step by step. So the first thing that we need to do is to send the message to the API for communicating with the AI models and get the object. The Stability AI will send to us an array buffer of object. So then we need to decode this array buffer and save into the local machine as an image. So let's do this. So this is it. And this is the object. Now we're going to create a function responsible to read this object and then save it locally as a PNG image. So I'm going to create a function here to do this. Private async. I'm going to call it persist data. And this is the Axios response, but I'm just going to pass any here. So what we are doing here, we need to save this image locally, which is the array buffer that we're getting from the API. I'm also going to create a bunch of utility functions for getting the temporary path into my current machine, and then we're going to save the image there. First, I'm going to create a folder called utils that contains a bunch of utility functions. And then I'm going to create a function called file.utils.ts. So this is going to be a bunch of utility functions for reading files from the temporary path on the machine. the first thing that we need to do is to create a function to define the path where we're going to save the images that we're going to receive from the API into the current machine. So let's do this. Export const. We're gonna call this get data folder path. And the path is going to be the path.resolve. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna call this result for not having conflicts. It's going to be path.resolve, which is going to be the temporary directory from the current machine. And we're also going to define an assets folder. Assets folder name. So this is going to be the folder in the current machine. We're going to save the images that we're going to receive from the Stability.AI API. I'm going to call this Stable Diffusion API images. You can call it whatever you want. And then we're going to pass this here to resolve the path. I'm also going to create a function to create this folder if it doesn't exist on the current machine for preventing some issues. If the folder doesn't exist, create folder if not exists. We're going to basically receive folder path, and if the folder doesn't exist, what we're going to do, we basically create this folder. Perfect. And then we pass this here, and then we pass result, and then we return the result, which is the folder that is going to hold the Stable Diffusion images in the local machine before we send back to the user from the REST API. Perfect. So here on the service layer, what I'm going to do, I'm basically going to import that function. You choose get data folder path. And here on this persist data, we're going to persist the image that we received from the Stable Diffusion API. I'm also going to create a function here to persist the data. Export const persist data. And here we receive the data. I'm going to pass any for not having issues with TypeScript. And then we also pass the folder path. Sorry, the file path, which is a local path in our machine. So to make it more explicit, we can even call it local file path to indicate that this is a local path in the current machine. And then what we do here, we basically call the fs.write file sync. Then we pass the path and the data. Perfect. So here I'm also going to import that function. Persist data. And I'm going to call this here persist data. And then, oh yeah, we're having a conflict here. You know what? I'm going to remove this and then make it directly on the other function since we passed this here. So here I'm going to do, we call the persist data. Initially we were defining it here, but I moved it to the file utils file. Persist data, we're going to pass here. We're going to pass a buffer from the data.data, and the local file path is going to be a combination of the get folder path and some random name that we're going to define. I'm going to use a timestamp from date.now.png. Perfect. This is going to be the image that we're going to save locally. If you want to see this in the current machine, what we can do, I'm gonna persist this in a variable file path, and let's return the file path from the current folder file path. I'm going to also print this console log file path. If you're using NestJS, you can also use the logger. But in this case, I'm going to use the console log because this is going to be temporary. So what we're doing here, we're calling this API. We're getting the data as an array buffer. And this is also part from the NestJS call to get the access object. Then here we are defining a path to save the image locally in the current machine. Then we persist the image locally. And then we return from this function the path for the file in the current machine. Let's experiment and see what's gonna happen. So what I'm going to do, I'm gonna start the server again. Let's go back to Postman. On the body section, go to the raw and then change this to JSON. And then let's define the object. The attribute that we defined is this prompt that we're gonna pass here as a JSON. I'm gonna say that I wanna see a Shiba Inu dog as astronaut. That's how we're going to pass this text to the Stable Diffusion model, and the model will generate an image based on this text and send back to us. Let's see what's gonna happen. So this is the path on the current machine, but we were supposed to send the actual image, not the path. So let's see the image in the current machine. I'm gonna copy this folder path, and then I'm going to open up that folder here on terminal, cd this, and then open. So this is the image generated by the Stable Diffusion, and it is persisted on the current machine. Now we need to send this image from the current machine to the REST API. So how we can do this with NestJS? Here on the service layer, I'm going to make some changes. First of all, we need to use some interceptor to manipulate images. We need to use this interceptor and the file interceptor. So basically we need to pass this, use interceptors, file interceptor, and then on the signature of the function, you also need to pass an object that represents the response, which is this one. We pass @res, and the object is a response. So instead of returning this directly, what we need to do, we need to save the path, file path, in the current machine, and then we need to create a read stream. Create read stream from the file path that we defined previously in the service layer, and then we call this file.pipe, and then we pass the response in the pipe. If you have some TypeScript issues, you can change this to any, so TypeScript won't bother you anymore. And that's pretty much it. Let's try again. I'm gonna pass the same string, Shiba Inu as a dog astronaut. Let's see what's gonna happen. Perfect, that's it. Now I have a REST API made using NestJS that can communicate with Stable Diffusion and generate AI images. As a bonus section, I'm gonna show to you how we can pass a negative prompt to remove some things from the image, and also pass some dynamic information like the image width, the image height, how many steps you want to pass to the model, and some other extra information. Because let's say, for example, I want a bowl of fruits. Perfect. Let's say, for example, that I don't want strawberries. I want the other fruits, but no strawberries. How we can say to Stable Diffusion to remove strawberries from the bowl of fruits? We need to pass a negative prompt. How we can do this? First of all, I am going to update the DTO object to pass a negative prompt as an optional string. I'm also going to wrap this class with the validators, so we can validate the structure of this object if you want to. I'm going to add yarn add class validator and the class transformer. Perfect. So what I'm going to do here, I'm gonna say that this is a string, and this is not empty. Perfect. And this is a string, but in this case this is optional. Perfect. So what we're going to do, oh yeah, I'm also going to pass the image width, which is an optional number. If you don't pass the number, it's going to be 512 by default. This is going to be a number, and it is optional. And the same for the height. Okay, perfect. Let's keep going. So here on the service layer, what I'm going to do, I'm going to read the height from the generate image object dot image height, and the same for the width, generate image dot width, and that's it. Let me check. Oh yeah, and the negative prompt. For reading the negative prompt, what I'm going to do, I'm going to first move this text prompts out from this object. I'm gonna say const prompts. It's an array of any. I'm not worried about the structure here. And then if the generate image dot negative prompt was defined, then we're going to add to the prompts array the push, and we're going to say that the text is the generate image dot negative prompt, but the weight is going to be -1. So this is going to be the negative prompt if the user defines the negative prompt. And then we pass this prompts array to this text prompts here. Perfect. Let's try again. You go here. So for example, here we want to see a bowl of fruits. Perfect. But let's say for example that I don't want strawberries. So I'm gonna say negative prompt, which is the attribute that we defined here. Negative prompt is going to be no strawberries. Let's try again. Perfect. You see that there are no strawberries in this image because we passed as a negative prompt to don't pass strawberries into our bowl of fruits. And that's pretty much it. If you want, you can also pass the image width and image height that we defined. And this is the folder that we save locally the images, so we can see here all the images that we created for testing locally. And that's it. Now we have a REST API that can communicate with Stable Diffusion and pass random text to generate AI images. And that's pretty much it. If you like this kind of content, just give me a thumbs up, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. I hope you liked it, and I see you in the next time.